Picture this. You're enjoying a fantastic meal at your favorite spot, and then, out of nowhere, the President of the United States walks in. It's not as far-fetched a scenario as you might think. From the very first president, we're looking at where each U.S. leader preferred to eat because, after all, they're people too. So when you go as far back as the first American president, George Washington, you go to a time where restaurants in the modern sense were not really that popular. What Sir Washington did have were taverns and inns, and one of his favorites was the City Tavern in Philadelphia. He was seen dining there many times, as well as the Fraunces Tavern in New York City. John Adams was similar to the man in the chair before him, and he loved unwinding down at a tavern in Boston known as Mason's. See, Mason's was a cozy little joint that the president could drink at without any disturbances. Adams was known for his appreciation of simple New England fare, often enjoying a hearty bowl of clam chowder. Thomas Jefferson did not really jibe with the comforts of the simple life at the corner of a bar, but instead, he found a lot of solace in French cuisine and fine dining. The two go together as well as jam and toast do, so it is no wonder he spent a lot of time in Paris visiting restaurants like La Petite Venise and Café de Paris. Jefferson is also credited with introducing macaroni and cheese to America after discovering it on his travels in Europe. When James Madison was not busy with the lovely cooking his wife would prepare with the fresh produce of the Montpelier estate, he was reportedly busy at various inns and taverns in Philadelphia. He had no proper favorite that he would swear on over all else, but he liked sampling everything the city's various establishments had to offer whenever he could. Guess he was adventurous? James Monroe did not really have a favorite restaurant in particular because, like Jefferson, he gained a taste for the finer delicacies of French cooking. Once you get hooked, you get onto it for life, and back in their day, most local places did not specialize in French cooking at all. James Monroe ate the same way during his stay at the White House too. John Quincy Adams, on the other hand, was not really a fan of eating for enjoyment at all when he was at the White House. In his diary, it is never really mentioned where he liked to eat out or what he enjoyed, but apparently he thought 6 or 5 small crackers and water were a sumptuous dinner. Despite having a French cook and a basement filled with French wine, Andrew Jackson was always found visiting the many places in Nashville where you could catch a good bite to eat. From things like chicken sandwiches to steaks, he was often at any tavern or inn with good grub. Jackson's fiery personality matched his love for hearty, simple meals, and he often ordered multiple steaks in one sitting. Martin Van Buren loved going to places with good seafood, honoring his Dutch background with a good oyster. Oysters and various other kinds of seafood were common parts of Dutch culture back then, and despite growing up in Kinderhook in New York, he still tried various parts of the cuisine. He had a great love for fine dining and grand tables. William Henry Harrison was a big fan of this homely place called the Log Cabin Inn down in North Bend, Ohio. This inn happened to be one that his family came to own, which naturally became a part of his estate. Having a whole inn as a part of your property is quite the convenience after all. John Tyler loved anywhere you could find good spring chicken, woodcock, or ham and eggs. He had some pretty Virginian tastes, and that is what was trending in the state during the time he was president in the 1840s. James K. Polk was a pretty simple and straightforward president. He didn't spend much of his free time on exploring the cuisine of the country, though when he did eat, it was out in New Orleans where he could find Creole cooking and French delicacies. At the end of the day, though, Polk preferred steak and ham and stuck to a traditional Southern diet. Zachary Taylor was more or less cut from the same cloth, direct in his leadership and even more blunt and plain with his food. Wherever he went, he had the simple tastes of a boy raised in the southern countryside. He typically had cornbread at whichever tavern he went to and loved steakhouses that were popular. Millard Fillmore liked anywhere with good New England cuisine, and one of the places that had a good knack for it was the Willard Hotel. That place opened up during the time he was president, and it became a hub for influential people to eat and rub shoulders at. In particular, he loved places with a goof-clear soup. Franklin Pierce was also a fan of New England cuisine, especially things like fried clam. He loved visiting coastal areas like Maine and Rhode Island. Most of the presidents of the early era of the American presidency did not have many favorite places they would go to, because the restaurant industry was not half as developed. they still had areas where they frequented to get their preferences met. When James Buchanan, as not busy chewing down cabbage at the White House, he often enjoyed sauerkraut in German restaurants. And when even that bored him, he visited Pennsylvania for its famous Dutch food, though there are little references to any particular names. Buchanan was known for his bachelor lifestyle, and as the only unmarried president, he often relied on the hospitality of local inns and restaurants for his meals, giving him the title of a true foodie of his time. Abraham Lincoln was just like that, and he found a place to express that through Ford's Theater, which hosted performances of theater and also had meals for the visitors. Another place that he was known to visit was the Café de la Régence, which was known to be visited by high-ranking politicians at the time. Lincoln, known for his love of simple fare, once joked that a plate of plain apples and a glass of milk could keep him perfectly content at any gathering. Andrew Johnson was a simpler man, though, and he liked to relax with a good prime ribeye from anywhere in the Midwest. He often grew up eating cuts of beef of all kinds, so he definitely knew his way around the grill in more ways than one. You will find that he is not the only president to share a passionate love for steak either. The Willard Hotel is one of the few places to host two presidents, and Ulysses S Grant is the second person who enjoyed his stays at the hotel. Perhaps his favorite restaurant would be Delmonico's. It was a New York place that got pretty famous for its simple fare, which Grant was an avid fan of. Grant's love for Delmonico's steaks was so well known that the restaurant even named a steak after him, the Grant Steak, which was served with a side of fried oysters. Rutherford B Hayes was probably the biggest minimalist on the list. He was the type of person to have 1 cup of coffee as a breakfast and 1 cup of tea for lunch. Despite that, he loved angel cake, especially from Ohioan bakeries. He loved enjoying some with his wife, Lucy Webb Hayes. James A. Garfield is another president on the list who also had his taste buds influenced by Ohio quite a bit. He would visit the taverns and inns that you could find at the time in California and Washington, D.C., even though he wouldn't spend much time when he did get it on every last tenet of presidential duty. Chester A. Arthur was always known to visit fine dining establishments wherever he could. One of the most popular restaurants in his time was Delmonico's in New York City, and in Washington, D.C., he would go to places with a formal atmosphere and a haute cuisine menu. Despite how his eating habits led him to a spiral of health issues, Grover Cleveland was never one to cut corners when it came to enjoying the simple joys of food. He always had a fondness for steakhouses and seafood restaurants and frequented restaurant saloons during both of his terms. Near Benjamin Harrison home, there were places like St. Elmo's Steakhouse, which let him always enjoy the higher levels of American grilling and the BBQ culture in the country without having to step out too much, something we are sure he deeply appreciated considering his love for simple food anyway. William McKinley always had a fondness for ice cream, and in particular he loved strawberry ice cream. He was always seen checking out new joints that had opened up across the nation, especially places like Grater's Ice Cream. Ironically, it was his love of strawberry ice cream that led him to meeting his wife when he spilled it on her during the summer of 1871. Theodore Roosevelt had one restaurant in particular that he favored over all others. It was a place that had opened up during the tail end of the 19th century, and it was known as the Oyster Bar. There and Delmonico's were two places you could always spot the president basking in all the bountiful food his country had to offer, most of which was cuisine from other places. William Howard Taft loved finding seafood and steak as well as dining places that were trending in Washington, but he never really stepped out much besides that. He was a big fan of continental food and loved eating in substantial quantities, so he probably visited a few buffets in his time. The Chicago Chop House and the Palm were two places that people of Woodrow Wilson's tastes and caliber visited pretty frequently. He always had a fondness for any place that could go a medium rare steak justice, and he loved washing all that protein down with even more from an aquatic platter of seafood. Warren G. Harding, on the other hand, liked his food to be Midwestern rather than from the sea. He avoided any inn that specializes in seafood and instead preferred country foods like authentic chicken pot pies. His iconic poker nights at the White House were regarded as stag dinners where his wife, along with several private chefs, would cook up his favorite dishes while he played. You can assume this was his equivalent to going out to party. Calvin Coolidge enjoyed fried chicken and cornmeal, so he probably visited popular fast food joints that could serve up a box even a president would make time for. While he was not familiar with things like Popeyes and KFC too much in his time, as he just was not around at the time, there were definitely antique ways of enjoying fried chicken that were lost with time he must have enjoyed. Herbert Hoover, before his presidency, was seen spending a lot of time at this one place in San Francisco known as the Bohemian Club, which served pretty simple food but had a stellar selection of drinks. Some kinds of men, they only feel relaxed at the edge of their bar seats, and after becoming president, he probably never found the time to regularly go. Hoover was particularly fond of boiled chicken with white sauce, a dish so bland it matched his reserved personality, earning him the nickname the Great Engineer of Bland Cuisine. Franklin D. Roosevelt loved several restaurants and places to eat, so it is hard to pick a solid favorite, but some contenders would definitely be the Mayflower Hotel, which had opened up during his presidency, and the Brown Derby, which was a Hollywood hub for elites to come and grab a bite to eat at. Roosevelt was famous for his fireside chats, but he was equally famous for his love of hot dogs, which he even served to the King and Queen of England during their visit in 1939. Harry S. Truman loved everything you could find at the White House, and if there was anything he particularly felt like being served, it was never out of the question for the chefs he had available. Still, he also could not resist the Brown Derby. We wonder what kind of clout it gave to these places when they ended up being the favorite R&R spots for more than one president. The Greenbrier was a Southern outlet that served all kinds of classics from the frontier, and Dwight D Eisenhower loved spending his time escaping his Oval duties there. In particular, he loved their comfort food, which the place had in spades. Eisenhower was famous for his love of cooking, especially his personal recipe for beef stew, which he would prepare himself on occasion. So John F. Kennedy had two favorites that were as different as night and day. One was this simple pub called Kelly's in Boston, and the other was a fancy reservation-only place known as the Dunes in Palm Beach. They had nothing in common, but they were on opposite ends of the spectrum as far as atmosphere and food were considered. Lyndon B Johnson, on the other hand, loved and admired the Austin Club for its exquisite selection of cuts of beef and BBQ dishes that he could enjoy. The place also had a very old-school vibe to it, with pool and billiards to keep you company. Richard Nixon deeply admired Chasers, which was this celebrity getaway in California that served some of the best chili you could find in the entire country. Everybody needs to have their privacy, especially if it's with spicy food. Gerald Ford was extremely fond of eating things like English muffins and lemon tea, and he had strange food rituals that only he could make sure were done properly, like eating cheese every morning. He loved tea rooms like Walker's Jack-o'-lantern log cabin tea room and cafes more than anything else. The Explorer restaurant was one place that Jimmy Carter went to very regularly, as he was always fond of exploring the ever-changing food scene of Washington, D.C. with its many new cultural changes and fresh ideas. Ronald Reagan was pretty serious about his noodles, and the Spaghetti Factory was a chain of Italian food-based restaurants that he kept with his life. He also spent a lot of his time eating meals there when he could. Reagan's favorite snack, though, was jelly beans, so much so that he had a special jar of them on Air Force One, and they became a symbol of his presidency. George H.W. Bush loved the Old Pink House, where he loved reminiscing about his days as a youth with their take on Southern cuisine. Nothing like some good meat on the bone to keep you fresh, right? Bill Clinton actually had a diet similar to many fast food lovers in America, besides his daily intake of chocolate chip cookies and hash browns for breakfast. He was seen spending a lot of his time at McDonald's like a certain other president in recent history. Clinton's love for fast food was so well known that Saturday Night Live parodied him stopping at McDonald's for fries during a jog, a scene that became iconic in American pop culture. Unlike his dad before him, George W. Bush had more in common with Clinton's tastes. He loved fast food chains and nacho places or Tex-Mex cuisine wherever he could find it, and fine dining was not his preference. Bush had a particular love for cheeseburgers, often enjoying them with fries at casual spots like Fuddruckers, which became a go-to during his campaign stops. The Old Ebbitt Grill and Pizzeria Uno were two places that Barack Obama loved to eat at, and he particularly loved the deep dish pizza from Uno more than anything else in New York or Chicago. Donald Trump has always been real vocal about his love of fast and junk food, and to him, the ideal meal has always been a quarter pounder with refillable Coke from the nearest McDonald's. Trump even hosted a fast food feast at the White House for a visiting sports team, proudly serving burgers and fries from several popular chains stacked high on silver platters. When Biden was not busy with Mama Maria's and the Ivy restaurant enjoying Italian cuisine, he would often get whatever he could from local food trucks and was especially fond of ice cream. Paparazzi have gotten more than a few shots of him getting busy with cones. Biden's well-known love of ice cream is so strong that he's been photographed countless times with a cone, and he once joked that it's the one food he can never turn down. That wraps up our list of restaurants and cuisines presidents loved. Like, subscribe, and let's keep these memories alive.